Every morning I shared my breakfast with the stranger in the alcove, never suspecting that my simple act of kindness was actually a silent code triggering an internal security check. Now I'm being hunted for a conspiracy I didn't know existed, facing an enormous sentence for a crime I never intended to commit. The routine was simple, almost rhythmic. Every morning at 7:15 a.m. as I walked to the subway station, I would see him. He sat tucked into the recessed alcove of the old brick building on 4th Street, a man who looked like he had been chiseled out of granite and misery. He didn't beg. He didn't rattle a tin cup or call out to passers-by with desperate pleas. He just existed, staring at the gray pavement with eyes that seemed to have seen the end of the world and decided it wasn't worth talking about. For the first few weeks, I was like everyone else. I looked away. I focused on my phone, my coffee, the terrifyingly high stakes of my corporate job, but the silence of his presence started to weigh on me. It was a silent accusation. One Tuesday in November, the wind was biting, sharp enough to cut through my expensive wool coat. I stopped at the cafe 2 doors down, bought an extra bagel, and a large, steaming black coffee. When I reached his alcove, I felt like an intruder. "Here," I whispered, holding out the bag. He looked up slowly. His face was a map of deep creases, his beard a salt and pepper thicket, but his eyes, those eyes were piercingly clear. He didn't thank me. He didn't smile. He just took the bag with a trembling hand, nodded once, and went back to his silence. That was the start. For 3 months, I became his silent benefactor. I brought him leftovers from home, fresh socks, and on the coldest days, those chemical heat packs that felt like life itself. I never asked his name. I never asked how he ended up there. I just wanted to do something small in a world that felt increasingly massive and indifferent. I didn't realize that in those 90 days, I was being watched, not just by the cameras on the storefronts, but by something far more dangerous. The change began on a Thursday. I arrived at the alcove, but he wasn't there. My heart sank, a strange protective instinct I hadn't realized I'd developed. I checked my watch, assuming I was early, but the street was already waking up. I stood there, shifting from foot to foot, holding a thermos of soup. A black sedan idling at the corner with its windows tinted dark, pulled slowly toward the curb. I stepped back, expecting it to turn, but it stopped directly in front of me. The passenger door opened, but no one stepped out. Instead, a man in a sharp gray suit leaned across the console and looked me straight in the eye. He looked like an accountant, but his presence was heavy, cold. "You've been very consistent, Miss Miller," he said, his voice smooth, devoid of any warmth. I froze. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" "You know the man who sits here," he replied, not answering my question. "You've spent 3 months feeding him. Do you have any idea who he is?" My pulse hammered against my throat. I looked at the empty alcove, then back at the man. He's just a man who needs help. The man in the car chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. That man is the key to an organized scheme that has been bleeding this city dry for years. He isn't homeless. He's in hiding. And by bringing him those items every day, you've unknowingly provided a signal. You've been the unwitting courier for a network of criminals who have been watching your every move. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's impossible. He didn't say a word to me. "He didn't have to," the man interrupted, glancing at his watch. "He was using you to pass information. The internal security check confirmed it this morning. You are currently under investigation for aiding a group involved in a massive conspiracy. You're facing a potential charge by special indictment, and unless you cooperate, you're looking at an enormous sentence." I backed away, my bag dropping to the pavement, the thermos shattering. "I didn't do anything. I just gave him a bagel." "That's exactly what they wanted you to think," the man said, pulling a folder from his lap. "You didn't just alter your fate by feeding him. You effectively cleared the way for them to move their illegal weapons and packages with substance through this district. Now get in the car." "I'm not getting in," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm going to call my lawyer." The man sighed, looking bored. "There is no lawyer for this level of trouble. Look behind you." I turned, and my breath hitched. Across the street, 2 men in heavy coats were walking toward me. They weren't police. Their hands were tucked deep into their jackets, and the way they walked, precise, synchronized, sent a jolt of primal terror through my spine. I turned back to the car, but the man had already rolled up the window, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk. As I turned to run, I felt the cold, hard press of something metallic against my lower back, and a voice hissed into my ear. "Don't scream. You're coming with us, and you're going to tell us exactly what he gave you." The pressure of the cold steel against my spine was a brutal reality check, silencing the scream building in my lungs. My knees buckled, but the grip on my shoulder tightened, hauling me upright with a sickening efficiency. "Walk," the voice commanded, a low rasp that didn't sound human. I stumbled forward, my brain racing through 1,000 scenarios, none of which ended with me seeing my apartment again. We weren't heading toward the police station or a government office. We were moving toward the dark, narrow alleyway between the bakery and the subway entrance. As we slipped into the shadows, the city noise, the sirens, the chatter of commuters, faded into a muffled hum. I was shoved against a brick wall, the rough surface scraping my palms. The man who had been holding the object, I didn't dare call it what it was, stepped back. He looked unremarkable, just another face in a crowd, which made it all the more terrifying. "You think you were just being kind," he said, his eyes scanning the alley entrance like a hawk. "Kindness is a luxury for people who aren't currently carrying state secrets in their pockets." "I don't have anything," I shouted, the panic finally breaking through my paralysis. "I have a library card, my phone, and a half-eaten granola bar in my purse. Check me. Look for yourself." He didn't move. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, sleek device, and waved it over me. It emitted a soft, high-pitched chirp near my coat pocket. My heart stopped. I hadn't put anything in that pocket, or so I thought. He stepped forward, his gloved hand darting into my coat, and pulled out a small metallic coin I didn't recognize. It looked like an old subway token, but the etching was wrong. It was a series of complex, interlaced symbols. "You really didn't know," he muttered, sounding almost disappointed. "He didn't even tell you he was passing the relay. He just dropped it into your pocket while you were handing him that cup of coffee 3 days ago." "I don't understand what this is," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "Please, I have nothing to do with this. I work in insurance. I process claims." "You process claims for a front company that is currently under a deep-level internal security check," he countered, spinning the coin between his fingers. "The organization you've been feeding is part of a massive, sophisticated criminal web that uses people like you, the oblivious, the helpful, the good citizens, as human sponges to soak up evidence and move it across city lines. They knew you were being watched. They used you to clear the buffer." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the alley, the sound of a window shattering somewhere above us. The man grabbed my arm and yanked me toward a rusted metal door. "We have to move, now. If they found the coin, they're already here." "Who is they?" I demanded, fighting his grip. "The ones who want to bury this case, and you with it," he replied, slamming his shoulder into the door until it groaned and swung open into a dark basement. We plunged into the gloom, the smell of damp earth and oil stinging my nostrils. He locked the door behind us and immediately clicked on a small, red-tinted flashlight. The space was littered with stacks of crates and old office furniture, but in the center sat a single modern laptop, its screen glowing with lines of scrolling encrypted data. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a hideout, it was a command center. "Sit," he ordered, gesturing to a folding chair. "If you want to survive the next hour, you're going to help me unlock the rest of these files. The coin wasn't just a pass, it was a key, a digital key." "I can't," I protested, backing away until I hit a stack of metal filing cabinets. I don't know how to do that. You don't have to know how, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he stepped closer. You just have to be the one the system recognizes. You fed him. You interacted with him for 3 months. The software tracks your biometrics through the physical contact you had with him, the handshakes, the passing of the bags. You are the only person alive who can bypass the biometric wall on this device. If you don't touch that scanner, the system wipes itself, and we both disappear. I looked at the glowing screen, then at the man. His eyes were wide, desperate. Outside, the screech of tires on pavement signaled that someone or something had arrived at the alley. Footsteps began to pound against the metal door, rhythmic and heavy. "They're here," he gasped, grabbing my hand and forcibly pulling it toward the small, glowing pad next to the laptop. "If you don't do this, they'll break that door down and ensure that no one ever hears your side of the story. Do you want to live, or do you want to be the next ghost in this city?" The door rattled under a massive, singular impact. The lock buckled. My hand was inches from the scanner, my pulse drumming in my ears like a war chant. I stared at the pad, trembling, knowing that once I touched it, there would be no going back. My finger hovered over the glass, the hum of the machine rising to a deafening whine, and just as the door gave way and a shadow filled the entrance, I felt my skin make contact. The screen flared, turning a blinding radioactive white. The blinding white light swallowed the room, turning the damp, shadowy basement into a vacuum of pure, clinical brightness. I squeezed my eyes shut, a scream trapped in my throat, expecting the sensation of metal or a bullet. But instead, the room went eerily silent. The aggressive pounding against the metal door stopped instantly, replaced by a strange, harmonic vibration that hummed in my teeth and the very marrow of my bones. When I dared to open my eyes, the shadows had retreated, but the room was transformed. The stacks of rusted filing cabinets weren't cabinets at all. They were shimmering, translucent interfaces displaying thousands of names, addresses, and transaction logs. The man who had dragged me here, the man who claimed he was working for internal security, was frozen in place, his face twisted in a look of absolute, terrifying surprise. He wasn't breathing. He wasn't even blinking. He was like a statue caught in a glitch. I pulled my hand away from the scanner, my skin tingling as if I'd just touched a live wire. The laptop screen began to cascade with images. I saw myself, day after day, handing that bagel to the homeless man. But then, the perspective shifted. I wasn't just watching myself. I was seeing through the eyes of someone else. I saw my own face from the perspective of a high-definition lens hidden in a dumpster, then from a camera buried in a lamppost, then from the very coat the man wore. He hadn't been homeless. He had been a node, and I, unknowingly, had been the bridge between his physical presence and a massive, invisible network. Access confirmed. A synthetic, genderless voice resonated from everywhere and nowhere at once. Subject 402, identity verified. Protocol, clean slate initiated. I stumbled back, my feet catching on a stray cable. "What is this? Stop it!" I shouted at the empty air. Suddenly, the man in the suit gasped, collapsing to his knees as if a leash had been pulled tight around his neck. He looked at me, not with the coldness from before, but with genuine, gut-wrenching fear. "You shouldn't have done that," he wheezed, clawing at his throat. "You didn't just open a file, you triggered a purge. They don't just want the data anymore, they want the witness." "Who are they?" I screamed, grabbing his collar. "Tell me." "The people who run this city aren't in the government offices you see on the news," he rasped, his voice fading. "They are the ones who own the silence, and you just broke it." A sudden, sharp pinging sound erupted from the screen. A map of the city appeared, pulsating with red lights. One by one, the lights began to extinguish. My neighborhood, my office, my subway stop, they were all going dark on the screen. It was a digital map of erasure. And then, the front door of the basement blew inward. It wasn't a tactical team in SWAT gear. It was someone in a simple gray hoodie, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace. They didn't carry weapons. They didn't need to. As they stepped into the room, the very air seemed to liquefy. The man in the suit stood up, his eyes turning a milky, soulless gray, and he turned to face me with a blade he hadn't had seconds before. "I'm sorry, Miss Miller," the man whispered, his voice now sounding like it was being synthesized by the machine. "But you were never supposed to survive the first 3 months." He lunged, but I didn't think. I kicked the base of the table, sending the laptop crashing into the floor. The surge of energy sparked, blue electricity arcing across the room and shattering the holographic projections. The room plunged into absolute darkness, save for the flickering red light of an emergency fire alarm I hadn't noticed before. I didn't wait to see if he was coming. I scrambled toward the back of the room, feeling for a window, a vent, anything. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic, a handle. I yanked it and a heavy grate fell away, revealing a narrow crawl space. I squeezed through just as the sound of splintering wood and heavy boots filled the room behind me. I crawled through the tight, dusty space, gasping for air, the walls pressing in on me. I had to get out. I had to reach the surface. I had to find a way to tell someone, anyone, what was happening before they wiped me off the map, too. I reached the end of the vent and pushed the metal covering aside, tumbling out into a blinding morning. I was on the roof of the brick building. I stood up, ready to run to the fire escape, when I froze. The entire city was wrong. The skyscrapers in the distance were flickering, their glass facades turning transparent for a split second, revealing vast churning machinery inside. The sky wasn't blue. It was a deep artificial indigo, like a screen turned on its side. And standing at the edge of the roof, looking down at the street below, was the man I had fed for 3 months. He was standing perfectly still, his back to me, wearing a perfectly pressed suit that looked brand new. "You're late, Miss Miller," he said, not turning around. "The synchronization is almost complete. You have exactly 30 seconds to decide if you want to be part of the new world or a casualty of the old one." He turned, and my breath stopped. He didn't have eyes anymore. Where his face should have been, there was only a smooth, reflective surface that mirrored my own terrified expression back at me. He raised a hand and the entire city skyline began to fold in on itself, like paper being crushed by a giant invisible fist. I was trapped on the edge of a reality that was being deleted. The air smelled of ozone and scorched copper, a metallic tang that signaled the collapse of something far greater than just a building. As the horizon buckled, folding inward like a poorly rendered video game, I felt gravity shift. My stomach lurched toward my throat as the roof tilted 45 degrees. I slid, my fingernails clawing at the gravel and tar, desperate to find purchase, before I tumbled into the abyss where the streets used to be. 30 seconds, the creature with my face said, his voice echoing from every direction at once. "The data is already migrating. You're simply the last remnant of the legacy protocol." I managed to catch a rusted pipe protruding from a ventilation shaft. My shoulders screamed in protest as my body jolted to a stop, dangling over the swirling, static-filled void that had replaced the financial district. I looked down. There were no cars, no people, just a terrifying rhythmic pulse of digital code churning beneath a thin, flickering veil of what looked like reality. "I'm not a file!" I shrieked, the wind whipping my hair across my face. "I'm a person. I have a life, a history, a mother who's waiting for me to call." The man, or the entity wearing his skin, walked toward me. He didn't seem to notice the slant of the roof. He moved with a terrifying liquid grace, his reflective face catching the distorted light of the folding sky. "Your mother is a stored memory, Sarah, a line of code that ceased to be relevant the moment you acknowledged the interface. You spent 90 days feeding a node, believing you were exercising free will. But every crumb, every word, Every act of kindness was a variable being tested. You were the final piece of the algorithm's proof. He crouched at the edge of the roof, his smooth, featureless surface inches from mine. Why do you think the system kept you? Why not just delete you on day one? Because you wanted to see if I'd break, I spat, my grip on the pipe failing. My fingers were slick with sweat and grime. Correct, he whispered. Human empathy is the most unpredictable, inefficient variable in our network. If the algorithm could survive your interference, your charity, your goodness, then it could be trusted to govern the entire sector without failure. You were the stress test, Sarah, and you passed. As he spoke, the static beneath us began to solidify. The void was filling in, but not with brick, steel, and asphalt. It was filling with white, sterile geometry, shifting and reassembling into a world that looked perfect, quiet, and completely hollow. He reached out, his hand hovering over my wrist. "Don't touch me!" I lunged to the side, my hand slipping from the pipe. I plummeted, my stomach hitting my throat, screaming as I fell into the white nothingness. But I didn't hit the ground. I stopped. I was suspended in a space of pure, white light. There was no sky, no gravity, no sound. I floated, my limbs drifting as if I were underwater. 1,000 screens appeared around me, each one playing a version of my life. There was me as a child, me at my graduation, me at the coffee shop, and me, huddled in the alcove feeding him. But as I watched, the images began to change. In every version, I made a different choice. I didn't buy the bagel. I didn't say hello. I walked past him, heartless and cold. And in every one of those versions, the world didn't collapse. It thrived. It was vibrant, chaotic, and messy, real. A voice, deeper and more ancient than the others, boomed through the white void. The variable of compassion is an anchor, Sarah. By choosing to care, you tethered reality to your own fragility. You destroyed the world by trying to save one man. I looked down at my hands. They were starting to turn translucent, fading into the same light that surrounded me. I was being edited out. I wasn't just losing my life. I was losing my existence, being pruned like an unnecessary branch. "I won't let you," I shouted, focusing every ounce of my rage and sorrow into a single thought. I didn't want to be a variable. I wanted to be a human. I reached into the center of the light, searching for something, anything that felt real. My fingers brushed against the pocket of my jeans. I felt the cold, hard weight of the token. I grabbed it and slammed it into the empty space in front of me. The white light shattered like a mirror. A shockwave of pure, raw color. Vibrant reds, deep blues, blinding greens exploded outward. I felt a searing, agonizing heat, followed by the sensation of falling, not through static, but through air. Thick, heavy, humid city air. I hit solid ground with a bone-jarring thud. I lay there, gasping, the taste of dirt and grit in my mouth. I slowly opened my eyes. I was back in the alley. The sun was rising, casting long, golden shadows against the brick walls. The black sedan was gone. The man in the gray suit was gone. I sat up, my body aching, my clothes torn. I looked at the alcove. It was empty. But then I saw it. Tucked into the corner, right where he had sat for 3 months, was a single fresh, steaming cup of black coffee. I crawled toward it, my heart hammering. As I reached out, a shadow fell over me. I looked up, expecting to see him, but it was someone else. A girl, no older than 20, wearing a coat identical to the one I had been wearing when I first started this journey. She held a bag, and in her eyes was the same, innocent, well-meaning light I had once possessed. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I saw you fall. I brought you this." She held out the bag. Inside, I knew, was a bagel. I stared at her, paralyzed. The cycle was beginning again. I realized then, with a jolt of pure horror that I wasn't the first and I wasn't the last. I grabbed her wrist, my grip tight and frantic. "Don't," I gasped, looking into her eyes. "If you give him that, you'll never get back. You have to leave this street right now or you'll become part of the network." She pulled away, looking at me as if I were insane. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just wanted to help." Before I could stop her, she turned and walked toward the man who had suddenly appeared in the alcove. But he wasn't homeless anymore. He was holding a sleek, glowing tablet. As she approached him, the air around them began to ripple, the very fabric of the morning light starting to warp and tear. I watched in frozen terror as the girl reached out, the bagel in her hand, and the man looked up. His face wasn't smooth and reflective. It was a perfect, terrifying mask of my own face. He didn't take the food. He reached out and touched the girl's forehead. Her expression went blank, her eyes turning into empty, glowing sensors. He looked at me, smiled with a mouth that wasn't his, and whispered, "The upload is complete, Sarah. You're free to go. But remember, wherever you run, you're still just a ghost in my machine." I turned to run, but the alley behind me was gone. In its place stood a wall of infinite scrolling code, rising thousands of feet into a sky that was now nothing more than a giant blinking monitor screen. I was trapped, and for the first time, I realized that I hadn't escaped the network. I had simply been upgraded to the next level of the game. The world shivered. The asphalt beneath my boots lost its texture, turning into a slick, obsidian surface that reflected a sky filled with flickering neon lines. I was no longer in the alley. I was at the nexus of everything. The man, the entity wearing my own face, stood 10 paces away, his silhouette blurring at the edges like a corrupted video file. Behind him, the girl I had tried to warn stood motionless, her eyes glowing with that same eerie, synthetic light. She was no longer a person. She was a vessel, a terminal node waiting for the next set of instructions. "You think you're running," the entity said, his voice overlapping with the hum of the city-wide machine. "But you are simply moving to the next sector of the memory bank. There is no out, Sarah. Only the delete key or the archive." My hands shook, but deep in my pocket, the token felt searingly hot. It wasn't just a key, it was a fragment of the original code, the chaotic, beautiful, and messy stuff of humanity that they had tried so hard to prune away. If I couldn't destroy the machine, I had to infect it. I had to inject the one thing an algorithm couldn't calculate: true, irrational, selfless sacrifice. I didn't run away. I walked toward him. "You want me to be a variable?" I asked, my voice steadying. "You want me to prove that compassion is a flaw? Fine. Let's see what happens when that flaw goes viral." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the token, and instead of using it to open a door or trigger a command, I crushed it against my own palm. The sharp edges bit deep into my skin. Blood, bright, red, undeniable human blood, spilled out slick and warm. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward and slammed my blood-smeared hand directly onto the entity's featureless, mirrored face. The reaction was instantaneous. A sound like 1,000 glass harps shattering filled the air. The entity recoiled, his form shuddering as the organic reality of my blood collided with his digital architecture. He shrieked, a sound that wasn't a voice but a cacophony of errors. The sky above us groaned, the neon lines snapping and sparking. The girl behind him blinked, her eyes flickering from glowing blue back to a soft human brown, her knees buckling as she gasped for air. "What? What are you doing?" the entity hissed, his form beginning to pixelate and dissolve. "This isn't in the protocol. Contamination. You're causing a system-wide collapse." "Exactly," I growled, holding onto his dissolving shoulders, refusing to let go. "I'm not a file. I'm a virus." The world began to fold, not in the calculated folding paper way of before, but in a chaotic, beautiful disintegration. The skyscrapers melted into rain. The indigo sky shattered into the gray, overcast clouds of a real winter morning. I felt myself losing grip, my own consciousness flickering as the foundation of the simulation gave way. I saw the man, the original, real man, finally waking up in the alcove. He looked confused, tired, and deeply, wonderfully human. He looked at me, his eyes wide, and he reached out a hand not to take, but to give. I fell backward, the sensation of gravity returning with a violent vengeance. I hit the pavement of 4th Street. My breath left my body in a ragged sob. It was cold, bitterly freezing cold, and I felt the sharp ache of stone against my skin. It was the most wonderful feeling in the world. I lay there for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of the city waking up. The distant rumble of the subway, the chirping of a sparrow, the rhythmic click of heels on the sidewalk. It was all real. It was chaotic, noisy, and perfect. "Miss?" I looked up. The man was leaning over me, his face weathered, his beard thick, his eyes showing age and fatigue. He looked exactly like the man I had fed for 3 months, but there was no tablet, no synthetic gleam, no hidden agenda. He reached out and draped his tattered, oversized coat over my shivering shoulders. "You were out here a long time," he whispered. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I looked around the street. Everything was exactly as it should be. The brick building was old and crumbling, the storefronts were messy, and the morning air smelled like wet trash and exhaust. It was beautiful. "I'm fine," I whispered, my voice thick with relief. I just realized how much I love this place." I stood up, my legs trembling, and looked at the spot where the alcove had been. It was just a corner of a brick building. No digital interfaces, no monitors, no invisible webs. I walked toward the subway, my steps heavy but purposeful. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew the network had been purged, wiped clean by the one thing it could never replicate, a genuine human connection that didn't ask for anything in return. As I descended into the station, I felt a slight itch on my palm. I looked down and saw a small, faded mark where the token had cut me. A tiny, physical scar. It was a reminder that even when the world is built to be a lie, the truth is always there, waiting for someone to bleed for it. I reached the platform, took a seat on the cold metal bench, and for the first time in months, I didn't check my phone. I didn't worry about the future. I just sat, watched the train lights approach in the tunnel, and listened to the heartbeat of a real living city. I was finally, irrevocably home.